So this is how that turned out. It takes a while and you have to be quite careful with it, but the reason that I was doing it with the belt sander and not manually is because when you're doing it manually with a sanding block like this, even if it's nice and flat and hard, it seems inevitable that you're going to round off the corners, and I didn't really want to do that because, well, it means that the plate that you stick on the back is not going to sit on there so nicely. So this is the plate that I'm going to make here from this little piece of, no, not plywood. It's actually just plain old wood for a change. I thought I'd use this piece that's been sitting around for ages. これね、シナだって。いいか悪いか分かんないけど。日本から持ってきてずっと今まで用はなかったけど、今日はその出番が来たよ。よかったね。しくじるなよ。Anyway, so I've printed out this template thingy here which matches what I've ended up with, this sort of elliptical shape. And I thought I'd do it that way rather than trying to make this circular because it's already slightly smaller than I wanted, and I don't really want to make this any weaker than it already is. Or, you know, it's like narrow and not very strong to begin with. So I'm just going to keep as much material as I can, and I'm going to match my template to that. And oh yeah, so this wood is 5mm thick versus the 4mm thick, which is the thickest plywood I have. And the reason that I'm going with normal wood instead of plywood is that I want to put self-tapping screws into these holes. And it just seems that regular wood would be a little bit stronger for that kind of thing than plywood. Possibly, I don't know. I mean, it's probably not that much difference in it. So this is how that turned out. I put a couple of wooden dowels on the back, held on there with screws like that. And they're going to go into... What? No, it does not look like a pig's snout. Shush. They're going to go into these two little holes there like that, and it'll sit in there nicely. And the point of having these little plugs in there is to increase the surface area of the transition between the soft foam and the relatively hard wood. I just didn't really feel comfortable with it having just a flat plate on each side like that. So this should increase the glue area, and it should also resist the twisting in that axis a little bit more as well. Probably doesn't really need to be done like this, but it's pretty easy to do, so I thought I would do it that way, and that's how I did it on the Skyhunter style plane, and it seems to be working fine. So then obviously you would stick your motor onto one of these and put that on there like that. Now you'll notice that if I can hold this in the right place, those screws are countersunk, but they don't actually need to be. So why did I go to all the trouble of doing that? Well, I'm actually not going to put my motor on here, at least not to begin with. I'm not going to have a plain old mini Talon style motor sitting here. So what am I going to do? Well, keep watching. So here are these pieces after they've been tidied up. These smaller ones did not need to be carbon really, but there was a bit of an empty space here, so I thought I would make use of it by making these two a little bit stronger. They do need to be fairly strong, these ones. Well, that one does anyway. There's a couple of other plain plywood pieces there, so let me put this all together for you and see what it looks like. Fits together quite nicely. So we have these sort of streamlined nacelles, is that what they call these? Nacelles? At the top and the bottom. Like that. And I might put a bit of foam in here maybe after everything's all assembled and just sort of smooth that off quite nicely. Oh, what is it for? Oh, well, have a guess. I think you can guess what this is for. Let's look at that plate there. And this plate here, this looks like something we saw just before. Now you get it, don't you? And if you still didn't get it, maybe this will help. Oh no, it's too cold for this epoxy. It's too thick, I can't mix it properly. Oops. Oh. It's time to put some glass on the fuselage now, so I've sanded it all up and I went to 240 grit sandpaper, so it's turned out fairly nice, I think. It's a little bit hard to see exactly what it looks like in this light, but I like it, which is all that matters really, isn't it? So I've plugged up these holes that were there from the dowels. So there's one there, it's a little bit hard to see, that one. I left these holes here because I'm going to make a sort of a air vent or an air intake with those ones. And I'll just put a bit of packing tape over there while I'm glassing it to hopefully stop any large globs of resin from ruining that nice, easy to sand hole. And I've filled in these with some very lightweight filler, which I'll show you in a second. And down here we have this all now smoothed off as well. I also put some of that filler under this bit here where there was a nasty gap there right in the centre of the screen there, and I've just used that filler to smooth it over, and also to round off this corner, which was a right angle. It was going from the wing directly straight down, but now it just sort of curves a little bit smoother. This is what I've been using to fill in the little gaps there, and I just found this by going to the hardware store and asking for the lightest filler they had, and that shop is focused mainly on building houses and larger things, so I wasn't really expecting to find anything quite as lightweight as this, but it's working out really well. So it's called Resin Easy Fill Quick, and it says it's non-shrinking and can be painted in 30 minutes. I've found that 30 minutes is a bit optimistic. It's more like 1 or 2 hours really before you can sand it. But it is very lightweight, and when you open it up, it's the consistency of whipped cream, I think. Not whipped cream where it's sort of still smooth, but if you keep whipping the cream until it gets hard and stiff a little bit, it's like that. So it's a cross between that and also cottage cheese and cake icing and toothpaste. It reminds me of all of those things. It smells a little bit like toothpaste too. It smells quite nice. But when it sets to the consistency of chalk, roughly speaking. But anyway, it just seems to be just perfect for this, and it's cheap too. This was like $8 New Zealand dollars, which is I think about probably less than $6 US. So yeah, really pleased with that. I'm hoping to be using that quite a bit more. Regarding the actual application of the fiberglass, what I'd like to do is do it all in one go so that you could get some nice long runs of fiber going from all the way from the front to the back like that. But that raises the problem of how you're going to handle it to do that, because you sort of need to get access to all sides of it, and when one part of it's wet, it's hard to hold it like that, right? Ideally, what would happen is that the fuselage would kindly levitate above the bench here for me, so I could just, rotate it around and touch every side of it without having to worry about that. But can't do that. So what I've decided to do is do it in 2 parts. I'm going to do the back first and then the front. Up to about here probably will be the separation point. And I made a special device to hold one end of it in place. So here's my amazing device. It consists of 3 long fingers which have padding on the inside, and they're hinged like that so that they can rotate into the center. Well, be like that when they're all in the same place. And this is all sitting on a Lazy Susan bearing thing under there, so that it can rotate around and around like this. So the idea is that I will put the nose of the fuselage in here. There's another bit of padding on there so I don't scrape it up on the wood. And then put, I'm thinking packing tape might do it actually, or wrap straps or zip ties or elastic or something around these 3 things, which are quite hard to do with one hand, but they would be brought into the middle and squeeze against the fuselage. And this purple yoga mat stuff in particular is quite soft and hoping fairly grippy on its own, but if it doesn't grip very well, I can probably just slap a bit more packing tape around somewhere to make sure that the fuselage isn't going to slip out. So that will let me access the tail quite nicely. And if I wanted to do it vertically, I could just, I wouldn't need all this piece over here, of course. I could just stick this base plate directly to the bench and work on it up and down like that. But the whole point of these pieces over here is so that I can, hold on, just put that there, otherwise it's going to slap down. So the whole point of this is so that I can have it coming out like that, and my aforementioned ideal situation of levitating above the bench for me is kind of achieved. Now this front plate, I can also replace this, what I'm going to do next for the wings. This piece here will be able to go on the front plate, so this will be turning around like that, and I have some holes drilled there for the dowels that are on the inside of my wings. So I can use the same situation to access the wings and turn them around nicely and have the wings also levitating above the desk for me. So I'm looking quite forward to this. Hopefully it's going to be grippy enough to hold everything together. There we go. It's fairly securely stuck in there actually. Turning around nicely. I'm using some of this wrap strap stuff which I got, my friend in Japan sent me this. Can we get this in New Zealand? I'd like to find some more because I'm starting to run out. It's really, really neat stuff, and it's quite tough. So I'm not anticipating that anything's going to go wrong with what I've done here. Just pulled it, put it, you can slide it up and up to adjust the tension or the compression, which is quite nice. But just in case it breaks, because if it breaks, it would be rather disastrous. So I'm going to put some packing tape or something a little bit more around here as well. Okay, there's everything mounted, ready to go. I put quite a bit of packing tape on there because when I moved it around, it sort of shifted a little bit disconcertingly every now and then. So I didn't like that too much, so the packing tape has taken care of that. Unfortunately, it's a bit crooked now, and the hatch on top is getting squashed down quite a bit, but I think it'll be okay. And now I can turn it from here, just gently, of course. You don't want to be too rough with it, but it's still nice that you can turn it from, well, see how it fell down there? Yeah, not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than trying to do this by yourself without anything like this. I'm just using a tissue to get some of the excess resin off. Usually I've seen people doing this with paper towels, but I don't really have any. Well, I have one or two, but not many. And I have lots of tissues here, so I gave this a try one day and I was pleasantly surprised to see that it worked quite well at getting the resin up and also not pulling up the glass. And actually the tissues last reasonably well. Like you get you get about 30 seconds or so per tissue if you're doing it like about this kind of speed. And you can sort of feel when the tissue, when it gets too dry, the tissue starts to stick, and that sort of lets you know, even if you can't see too well by the light shining on it, the feeling of the tissue lets you know that it's dry enough that you should move on to another place. Otherwise, if you keep trying to do it in the same place, of course, the tissue will sort of break up and get a bit stuck on there, but I haven't noticed it to be much of an issue, really. These pieces of peel ply here, by the way, are for the tail fins. I'm going to peel them off so that there'll be a bit better surface to stick the tail fins onto. The one on the bottom is for a ventral fin, fin to go below, like a mini talon. Not really planning to put that on, but at least if that peel ply is there, I'll have a nice area to stick that on if it comes to that. But probably it won't, so that peel ply is just going to stay in there permanently, I think. It's a pity it has a red line in it there, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see it. Oops. Well, my camera turned itself off there for some reason, but you get the idea. So that's how it's going to be sitting overnight tonight while it's drying. I tried putting a little bit of the vacuum bag plastic on here, this yellow plastic, to see if I could get a nice smooth surface there. I'm going to leave it there, and there's a bit on the bottom as well. And I also tried it here, but it didn't work very well. It seemed like it could be perhaps because there's not much resin on there. It's kind of dry already compared to my test piece, which I did this for before, which had quite a bit of resin on it, really, comparatively. So it's turned out really nicely there. But it seems like that technique needs more resin than what I had on here, because what happens is the bag, the plastic, doesn't want to conform to the surface very well. And it's not just because it's curved, it sort of gets on there and it looks fine as you spread it out, and then you come back a minute later and it's sort of crinkled up and it's got ripples in it a little bit. For some reason this bit here is relatively okay, so I'm going to leave this here, but you can see those ripples there? They weren't there before, and then I put this plastic bag on, and all of a sudden, well, not of a sudden, but after a few minutes, these ripples started to come up. But anyway, I'll leave it there just sort of as an experiment. See that? It's quite nice over here. And this, so this area here, there was more resin than there was in that other area that was rippling up. So it seems like as long as you have enough resin underneath it, it sits down there nice and smooth, like that, like my test pieces. It's about 24 hours later now, everything's all cured, and it seems to have turned out pretty well. It's probably added quite a bit of weight, but I'm okay with that for this long, thin section because it really did need some reinforcing. So the areas that we were looking at yesterday with the nice smooth parts where there was more resin are basically the same as they were yesterday. So it seems like what you see when you're placing this on when it's wet, this film, is what you get when it's cured, which is nice actually. It's like no surprises. So we can see that section there with all the ripples and stuff over there. Still not exactly sure why that happens, but I guess maybe this film just has a shape that it wants to stick with and it doesn't want to curve around. So perhaps if I had used smaller pieces that might have helped. I noticed that Igor Nigoda was using smaller pieces than this. Actually, sometimes he wasn't, so I'm not sure. It's not that big. Look, it's only about 8 centimetres there and about 10 or 12 there. But it is a fairly strong curve, like 180 degrees around. Anyway, the rest of it is okay. Oh, I did learn one new thing, which I wasn't aware of before. See this sort of diagonal line going through here? See that there? The reason you can see that is because of this cloth that I was using. This is the Red Raven cloth, and I was talking about this in a previous video, and I was quite pleased at the way the edge didn't fray like the Hobby King glass did. But it seems like the downside of that is that, okay, so this is the edge here, this is the edge of the cloth as it was when you buy it. Like, this is not where I cut, that's why it's nice and straight, and it doesn't fray, which is good. But see how it's a little bit different along the edge, it's kind of whiter. Not sure exactly what's going on there, but whatever it is, it doesn't want to sit down properly the way the rest of the glass does, and you end up with this line that's visible in there. Normally the edge of a glass would be like that. Yeah, see that there? You can barely see anything. You need to get in the right light to see the edge of the glass. Yeah, so I'm going to be trimming those edges off now, after all. Okay, it's about 12 hours later now, and it's cured to the point where I can handle it quite nicely without worrying about getting my hands sticky. Seems to have turned out pretty well for the most part. Yeah, a little bit too much resin around there. The bottom piece surface here, I didn't put any of that vacuum bag plastic on here because the piece of glass that I put on there turned out quite nice, and I just wanted to leave it as it was. And this bit here, I left the resin fairly thick. I did use the tissue paper to remove resin on most of it, but this bit I just left it there because this is where you're going to be, see that? This is where you're going to be taking the heaviest part of hits on landings that don't go so well. The nose can be a bit tricky, but that turned out okay too, really. So yeah, I'm fairly pleased with it overall. It's looking quite good. This didn't work out quite so well this time because obviously I'm trying to grab hold of a rather thin piece there, so I had to put this yoga mat stuff in there, and even then it wasn't quite gripping it too well, even though I tightened it with wire. Oh, it's a bit loose, isn't it? Maybe I could have got that wire a bit tighter. Jeez, that's weird. It was tight before. I guess it was tight until I pulled it out, huh? Yeah, but I was just worrying the whole way through that it was sort of slipping out a little bit. And the other problem is that this time I had a lot more leverage on it, so it was holding from here, and it was holding about, well, see how short that distance is versus this distance, so it's holding quite a bit more out over the edge against gravity. But anyway, got through it, and yeah, it works fairly well, so I'll be switching this plate out next to do the wings. But that'll be in the next video, won't it? So thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.